looking at this growing spiritual gifts for the kingdom impact. And we're talking about growing you individually, me individually, and hence us as a congregation. And one of the ways we do that, we've got to be very intentional about growing, about areas of growth. And we'll touch on that in just a moment. Maybe. Oh, there it is. All right. So we're talking about taking that next step, right? For you individually. How do I take that next spiritual? How do I impact people for Christ? We talked about the difference between spiritual gifts and miraculous gifts. I think one of the great disservices we've done to ourselves is we've listed all spiritual gifts, or really even most of them, if not all of them, as miraculous gifts and said they've ended. And it's just not the concept we see in Scripture, that these gifts are not all miraculous, and these are things that are essential for us to serve Christ. I asked the question, why are you on the team? Right? Have you thought about that? Again, this Americanistic, consumeristic aspect of the church. So many of us come to church to get something. What am I going to get out of this? And people all the time are dissatisfied because you didn't do enough, you didn't do what I said, you didn't do what I wanted, you weren't there when I wanted you there, and we're all going to fall short. But how do we get engaged? In other words, what is your participation? What do you add to the team? And one of the things we talked about last week, the reason it's important for us to know our gifts is that not everyone can play the same position. God doesn't want us in the same position. We used this illustration. If a basketball team, just 5 players went out on the court, you'd probably have the 5 biggest personalities out there. But there's a reason there's a coach. They have practice, which isn't just to make the players better. It's to analyze skills. So that when you're up by 2 with 30 seconds to go, you know who your defensive whiz is. They might not be able to shoot the three-pointer, but boy, do they play lockdown defense. And that's who you put on the field. And so in the church, it's important we know what our gifts are so that we can do this. We asked last week, do you know what your gifts are? And most all of us, right? No. You may have an idea of some, but how do we know what those are? Questions or comments on that review? All right, so Matthew 25, and you may think, what in the world does that have, Matthew 25, have to do with spiritual gifts? We're going to look at 2 passages here in a few moments. And that picture is incredibly small, isn't it? That is someone feeding hungry children, starving children. Let me be more clear, right? And it's like I didn't edit that slide enough. That picture should be way bigger so you can see what it is. And to illustrate this idea that we're talking about the church not being just worship. And I feel like sometimes I run the risk of devaluing worship because I talk about the rest of it so much. But most of us are here to worship, and so we're here for that. But is that our duty? Does that somehow make me righteous? What's interesting in Matthew 25, starting in verse 31, we're going to look at 2 passages here. Jesus is telling a story about the end judgment. And it's interesting, he doesn't talk about who goes to church. He doesn't talk about who has the right theology. He doesn't talk about who did this right or did that right. He's talking about something very, very different, isn't he? If you had to sum it up in one word, what's Jesus talking about? Matthew 25. Being prepared is early on, which, by the way, fits what we're talking about. Rita says service. It's about work or service, which is a way of being prepared that Parable of the 10 Virgins starts this chapter off. And he's explaining, here's how you're prepared. Be out, be doing what I would have you do. Let's read just an illustration or an example of this, starting in verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Now that's what we all want to hear, right? Now he tells them why. He says, "For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came in." Then the righteous will answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, and thirsty or give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me." So let me ask you a very specific question. How many of you visited someone in prison this week? You bunch of heathens. How many of you fed someone who was starving this week? We're not looking good. Gave water to someone dehydrated, thirsting to death? Put clothes on naked? Brittany, surely you can raise your hand for that. Right? You're not looking so good, are you? Uh-oh. Got Chris worked up. Talking about Cam. By this passage, we aren't looking so good, are we? Now, that's not all that Jesus is talking about, though, is he? It's not just a literal story that to be my servants, you're going to have to go find the hungry people. You're going to have to find the thirsty people. He's talking about a broader aspect of service, which really is a greater aspect of his entire ministry, is a manifestation or a demonstration of love. Anyone disagree with that? So, here is something to consider. We aren't all to feed the poor, or to feed the hungry, are we? How can you know that? Is there a passage that would say, I can prove indefinitely in Scripture? Anything come to mind? How about Acts 6? Remember what took place in Acts 6? The Hellenistic, the Hellenist widows were being neglected. It's interesting, verse 1, it was growing, verse 1 of 6. Now in these days when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in daily distribution. So in chapter 2, we have that beautiful picture where they're sharing everything, right? By chapter 6, we see the reality of this world and mankind affecting the church, and that not everyone's being treated equal. What is the apostles' reaction to this need?
At first, they were getting on them, telling them they need to do this, and then they had it set up for these men, these 7 men to go ahead and take care of the Grecian widows and the people that needed the help.
Okay, it's a great summary of the chapter, the early part of the chapter, absolutely. What is verbally the apostles' response in verse 2?
It's not desirable that they should leave the Word of God to minister to the widows.
Exactly. Should we quit preaching the gospel to serve tables? Now think about that. Are the apostles saying that serving tables is beneath them? No. If not, what are they saying?
They have more important things to do than the tables, you know. They could appoint men to do that while they're out spreading word.
Okay. So, and I'm with you, but I don't even know if it's a matter of importance, because if this poor lady dies of starvation, it seems pretty important to her, right? But I think I understand what you're saying. I just want to augment the language a little bit to draw out, I think, a little more accurate meaning.
It wasn't their gift. Their gift was to preach, whereas somebody else might be gifted to serve those widows.
It wasn't their gift to be serving in that capacity. They could be preaching the gospel. Does anyone want to try and compete with Peter in preaching the gospel? Right? Here is where I'm most effective. Brother, by the way, it's one of the great challenges or difficulties or shortcomings of modern day American churches where you hire a preacher to do it all. I'll tell you, at the end of each week, there's a list that long or longer of things that I would like to do that just don't get done. Right? And that's every week. Since I've been here and before I was here, I've never had a week in the church where I said, oh, I got everything done. Never. Right? One of the things that happens to us is we get people running in directions that they're not efficient in. I get doing things that I'm not efficient in. You get doing things that you aren't as efficient in. Not as much gets done. Why? For one, I mentioned the structure, right? The idea where we can drop money in a collection and pay someone to be a Christian for us is one concept we wouldn't verbalize, but I think we probably all, myself included, are challenged with. But secondly, I think it's a lot because we don't really know where we're supposed to be. One of the greatest challenges in the church on the other side of things is people want to be engaged, they want to be doing things, and we as leaders don't do a good job of equipping and empowering them, mentoring them to do that. come back, if you're still in Matthew 25, to the second part of this passage. Let me ask, and I hope maybe we've changed this equation a little bit. We have a handful of people here under 18. How many of you feel like you really have a lot to do, a place in the church where you can work and you know what you're doing in the church? Raise your hand if that's the case. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here tonight in that bracket, and we had one hand go up. Is that a problem? It's a problem. Now let me ask this. How many of you here over that age bracket feel like you know this is where I belong in the church, I'm doing what I can and what I'm good at to help the church spread the gospel? Three that are, within some iffies, right? It's a similar problem, right? So we're not complaining, it's identifying the issue to move forward. We need to do a good job of identifying what we can do. So Matthew 25, here's what I think is important. I'm not going to ask this question out loud, but I encourage you to ask this question yourself. Truth be known, most of us feel inadequate. Right? There's heads nodding. I didn't even ask not, but do you realize that's something I deal with? Today was an incredibly discouraging day, not because anyone did anything wrong, but I've struggled today with my own inadequacies. Right? So there's a side of us that says, I just quit, right? It's frustrating. I'm not, don't take as my notice, right? It's something that we all deal with, most of us, if not all of us, deal with, and it's just stronger sometimes as opposed to other times. Here's what I think we've missed about the parable of the 10 talents, because that's the other parable, right? And that's found in verses 14 through 30. And we're not going to read the entire parable tonight, because I hope we're familiar with it. If not, I encourage you either way to read it. But we know he gave the first guy 5 talents, the second guy 2 talents, right? And the third guy, 1 talent. Yeah, excuse me. I'll get it out. It's that math again. How many of you know what talent is?
It was money.
It was money. Anyone know how much?
What a talent was equal to?
Yeah. Some of the ESV Bibles have a footnote at the bottom. Mine is one of those, but I didn't know that. I looked all this up, researched it, and then I found this footnote literally tonight, right before class. A talent was a monetary unit worth 20 years' wages. 20 years' wages. So we're going to say the average wage today is $40,000 a year. A talent was worth $800,000 in today's money. Jerry, you going to give $800,000 to someone you don't have confidence in? Probably not. Me neither.
Question.
Yes.
So the 20 years worth for a labor, is that for the servants? 20 years money for the servants? Otherwise, the guy that's given the money, it wouldn't add up then.
Right. So 3, that was his money he's putting in his employees' hands. for them to take care of it. So it would have been the amount of 1 talent would be 20 years of their wages they gave. Yes. So there's 3 different words in the New Testament for servant. One's essentially an employee, one is a bond servant, and then one's a slave. So we're basically talking about employees' wages here. $800,000. Brother, I hope the message that just came through to you is you are valuable, you are capable, and God has a place for you in His kingdom. I've always taken that 1 talent man to be the individual that just didn't have literally 1 talent. That's kind of how I feel. It's sleeping. Now as I get older, I can't even do that well. Right? And so now I have a half a talent. That's not what this message is saying. You have a place. You are important. Now, you see I think this is all of us from time to time. You see the comic. We considered every potential risk except the risk of avoiding risk. That's what the 1 talent servant did, didn't he? I don't think, this is just, assuming, I don't think the master would have been nearly as upset if he'd lost all $800,000. He's not upset over not gaining that money. Think about this. One of what he's really upset about is this servant just questioned his judgment. He said, I trust you with this. Go do well with it. And the servant says, no, I might lose it. Digs a hole and buries it. Have you done that with any of your spiritual gifts? Probably. Because there's risk involved with using them. Questions or comments on the math or that side of the parable?
I always had a hard time with that one because to me, I think he did good putting it away, making sure he didn't lose it. I mean, it's a gamble. You're taking that gamble, I know it's the parable, but, one, you knew the master wasn't a good guy according to the servant, I know that I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you do not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I think I'd be afraid too. I think I would store it away and be safe. I mean, I know that goes against the parable, but I've always read those couple verses like, I think you did good.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things we, even psychologically, Corey, you've touched on something that's a deeper issue. It's been scientifically proven that we put more emphasis on loss than gain. Right? Since the creation of the stock market, it has gained 10% per year average for 100 years. But any conversation about stock market's not going to be about any gains. It's going to be about the last fall. People are still citing 2008 as a reason never get in the stock market. Right?
To me, it sounds like a normal person who didn't do nothing, so he blames it on somebody else. That's the way I interpret it.
I think you're right, now, Corey. I think the reason he sees the master so harsh is he's a slacker. And because the servant or the master doesn't even question that. He said, if you knew I gather where I did not sow, then why didn't you at least put it in the bank and let me gain usury? He's saying, you knew I expected something out of you. Here's maybe a point that I was trying to get at in a different way at the beginning of the lesson. God expects something from you and from me. He expects it. Yep, absolutely. I'll end with this verse and then we're going to quit because it's Sing night. 2 Peter 4, 10 through 10 and 11. 2 Peter 4, 10 and 11.
Chapter 4.
I noticed that. That's why I'm up here struggling. Let's try 1 Peter 4. That was a test. You all passed. Good job. Remember what I said about insufficient? As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks is one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves is one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. Notice each one has a different gift. They're told, use it. Use it. Timothy twice is told from Paul, don't forsake the gift of God in you. Don't forsake it. Use it. So, next week, Lord willing, we'll talk about the 4 tasks in order to get those, to pursue them. And then we're going to start through this shape. And what this will do, coupled with your survey, is start to use you. I won't be able to give you the answers, but it'll use you to find your strength and where you can be used. Thank you for your indulgence, your patience and time.